Hello and welcome to this live webinar co-hosted between Fitness Genes and My Vitalmetrics. We're going to give it a couple of moments to just allow people to join the webinar. But as you're joining, if you could just use the chat function to drop your name and where you're joining us from, that would be really useful to see who we've got in the audience today. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes just to allow more people to join. But yeah, just if you could just let us know who you are and where you're joining from, that'd be particularly helpful as well. We're also going to make sure we've got people joining from the Fitness Genes side as well, who will be able to answer any questions that we have. Jim from New York City, welcome. Good to see that you've been able to join. And KP from Hordine. I'm not familiar with Hordine. Whereabouts is Hordine? Hordine is in Hampshire. There you go, in the UK. Great. Well, really good to have you join us. We're just going to give it another minute or so just to allow for anyone else to join. And then we'll get started. If anyone else has joined in the last minute or so, please feel free to use the chat function just to let us know who you are and where you're joining from. Location, business, sports team, whatever it may be, let us know. Great. I think we'll get started. I imagine people will join as we go. But yeah, the chat function is there and is open to use. So if anyone's got any questions as we're going through today's webinar and has any questions for both Owen and for Stuart, then feel free to drop it into the chat function. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the webinar. And we'll make sure we'll either ask questions throughout or we'll come back to them at the end. So please do drop any comments and questions into there. But today is particularly exciting as this is the first time that we've actually been joined by someone outside of the Fitness Genes team. And that is Owen Hutchins, founder and director of My Vitalmetrics. So My Vitalmetrics is a health and human performance lab here in London, which provides diagnostic testing and health assessments for everyone from international athletes all the way through to recreational weekend warriors such as myself. So as well as VO2 max testing, which obviously we're talking about today, they also provide body composition testing, lactate threshold testing, and also DNA testing. So Owen is one of the partners of Fitness Genes and provides Fitness Genes DNA testing through his lab. So Owen, welcome.
Thanks very much, Alex.
Is that an accurate description of My Vitalmetrics? Have I missed anything out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would just add to that. Body composition testing mostly through DEXA scans, and we also do functional movement assessment and kind of resting metabolic rate testing and a range of blood tests as well. The aim really is just to get as rounded a picture of the individual as possible, so that we can kind of inform a health and performance improvement plan.
Wonderful. And correct me if I'm wrong, but did I read somewhere that you've done over 1,000 VO2 max tests at this point?
We have, yeah. I think we're probably approaching more than 1,200 now, but right up to date. But yeah, it's definitely one of our most popular services, and has really grown in the last 18 months or so.
And that is something that I want to move on to and also talk about kind of that trend and also maybe even the changes of the demographic of people that you're seeing as well. But I also saw on your LinkedIn that you were on Channel 4 this week. You were part of a documentary on Channel 4 on sort of alcohol and use of non-alcohol drinks. Do you mind just telling us a bit more about that experience? Yeah,
sure. I mean, so the experiment was to kind of demonstrate the effect that alcohol has on the fuels that we consume when exercising or just in day-to-day life. Because when you consume alcohol, it doesn't matter what else is in the system, the alcohol needs to be burnt first. And that can be kind of demonstrated by doing a VO2 max test because there's a respiratory quotient, which is kind of the proportion of carbon dioxide and oxygen that your body is expelling or taking on, and with alcohol, it's got a very particular respiratory quotient. So we can see directly through your breath exactly what you're burning. And so the experiment was take an average person, put them on to do a VO2 max. get some baseline figures and then give them a couple of drinks and then ask them to do it again. And what we really saw was, the extent to which, no matter what that person has in their system in terms of food, they will burn the alcohol off first, and that was demonstrated pretty clearly.
That's really interesting. Stuart, apart from the VO2 maxing element, that sounds like an ideal night out for you.
I was thinking about what volume intensity of alcohol I'd need. But should we move on to exercise before we digress?
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, also as a means of introduction, for anyone who's not familiar with the Fitness Genes team, we are also joined by Dr. Stuart Grice, who is the co-founder of Fitness Genes and also our chief scientific officer as well. So myself and Stuart provide a lot of the recorded content as well as webinar content for the company, looking at the reports we provide. So it's good to be joined by Stuart as always. Anything that I've missed off there from your own CV?
Not really, no. They can judge me on my content through this through this webinar.
Well, let's move on to that content then. So today's conversation and theme is very much focused on VO2 max testing, and also the genetic component that can inform an individual's VO2 max and that relationship between the two. So previously, VO2 max has been reserved for elite endurance athletes as a way to assess aerobic capacity. However, it's been popularised in the last few years, especially with the publication of things like Outlive by Peter Attia. And there's multiple videos now on YouTube where VO2 max is touted as the greatest predictor of lifespan. And Owen, back to my earlier comment about that change in demographic as well. Is that something that you've observed at Vital Metrics in terms of that shift away from more athletic performance to more general population of people who are looking and more concerned about their longevity and overall health?
Absolutely. So that's exactly the shift that we saw, and that shift really did start pretty much the day Peter Attia's book was released. We saw a massive uptick in interest in VO2 max from populations that previously would not have really ever considered it before. So we are getting many more people doing a VO2 max, especially kind of in the older populations and not necessarily fit populations. People want to get baselines of exactly where they are, and people are really starting to think about how they can maximize life and maximize their health, for that period as well. And I think that kind of forms a really important part of the picture for them.
So taking it just sort of like a step back, and essentially just taking it from the top, when we are talking about VO2 max and describing VO2 max, what exactly are we referring to? Okay,
so now keep in mind I speak as a practitioner rather than a scientist, so some of my terms might be a bit woolly, but I'll do my best. So your volume of oxygen is the amount of oxygen that your body takes on in order to live and to function. With every breath that we take in a volume of oxygen, and when we breathe out some of that oxygen as well. And the difference in that is what the body has used in that time. When we do that, when we are exercising, there is a total amount of oxygen that your body takes on, and of course, as your intensity increases, that amount increases. But it will reach a limit, which is based very much on your fitness and how much you've trained in those higher intensities. So as we get closer to the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can take on within a minute, that is exactly what VO2 max is. It's what that peak represents of how much oxygen your body can actually absorb from your breath.
Okay, so then looking at actually how you measure that, can you walk us through the process of measuring someone's VO2 max? So if I was to come down to my Vital Metrics, what's the step-by-step process that you'd put me through?
Yeah, so I mean, we would fit you for a heart rate strap so that we can kind of see what the intensities are throughout the test, and we would fit you with a mask. And the mask has got a valve that allows you to breathe in air from the room, but all expired air goes out via a tube into a metabolic chamber, into an oxygen chamber, and it's detecting how much oxygen you are, what's the difference in oxygen between what you've breathed in and what you've breathed out. And it's also, as it happens, detecting how much carbon dioxide you're breathing out. So once fitted for the mask, we'll calibrate the machine, we'll do some kind of initial baselines, we will get you standing on a treadmill or a bike, then walking, and then increasing levels of intensity slowly throughout what will hopefully be about a 20-minute test. We will get you working harder and harder, measuring that through your heart rate. But what we are trying to do is get because we're measuring oxygen uptake throughout this by the difference between the air in the room and what is being pushed into the machine. And what we're trying to get to is the point where maybe your heart rate continues to rise, but your oxygen tails off, and it shouldn't dip, but your oxygen will certainly tail off. And what we will see is your carbon dioxide output starting to spike. And once we've seen a very clear trend towards that, and those last couple of minutes are quite unpleasant, then that's kind of when we call the test to a stop, and we kind of cool you down and get you kind of recovering.
And then in terms of that selection between bike and treadmill, is there a preferred method that people use? Is there a better way from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean the literature generally sort of says that a treadmill will deliver you a higher VO2 max. Okay. Overall, you're able to kind of better utilize the full force of your central engine. On a bike, the oxygen uptake within the specific muscles within your quads is going to be a factor there as well, much more so than in running. But that said, for someone who is really well trained on a bike and doesn't want to run or doesn't regularly run, sometimes we can sort of see a better VO2 max from the bike. But it really is about the individual's preference, what they feel more comfortable with. If someone's accustomed to that burn that you get in the quads on a bike and they're quite happy with that, then a bike can be the right option for them.
Okay, and then in terms of, I guess, the output or the reading that you get from someone's VO2 max test, what kind of values are we looking at? What kind of range do you see? What's deemed as like a good VO2 max that someone should perhaps be aiming for?
Yeah, so I mean, we do see quite a wide range, and VO2 max is kind of quite dependent on age. So kind of the younger you are, the higher you would need to achieve in order to kind of get an excellent grade or a superior grade. But what we would sort of say, let's say for a 30 to 50 kind of year old person, for males, between 43 and 43 to 50 would be a really good VO2 max, and for females about 38 to 40 would be really good as well. So obviously we see a huge range in that, and certainly in our athletic population, the grades that kind of finish up in superior, they finish and then the athletes just keep going. They get very, very high. I mean, I think some of the highest recorded VO2 maxes in the world in athletes has been closing in on, if not achieving 100.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And, okay. And what's kind of the upper limit that you've seen at the lab?
We have seen an 80, I believe, an 80.5, something like that. Like quite extraordinary.
That wasn't your own. That wasn't your own reading, right?
Oh no! Yeah, clearly not.
And then I guess the theme of today is very much around sort of an individual's sort of ability to drive improvements in their VO2 max, which, as we understand, has been sort of reflected on as a key indicator of overall health and performance. So how much variation do you see between individuals in their ability to increase their VO2 max if they're coming back and being tested multiple times over a series of 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where they start. Many of our athletes kind of come in and their VO2 maxes are already really high. So all that they are looking for really is, a couple of points increase over, a 5 to 6 month period is great for them, because they're starting maybe in the 60s or something like that. In the general population, if someone is going from kind of not having exercised in the past to just doing some exercise, and maybe a little bit of that exercise is kind of dedicated to VO2 max specific training, sort of higher intensity stuff, we can see very major improvements of 10, 15, 20 points even, over the course of, let's say, a year. It can be improved when you start off at a kind of a low to average base. You can kind of improve it a huge amount.
Okay, so in terms of VO2 max as an absolute reading, but also improvements to it, we're looking at variables including sex, age, and training age, and all of those factoring into how we can understand an individual's score and also sort of VO2 max potential, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one factor that you sort of did mention, and that is actually weight. Because VO2 max is a calculation, and the units are milliliters of oxygen per minute per kilogram of body weight. So some people that we've seen have kind of managed to move the dial, more than 10% of their original thing simply by losing 10% of their body mass. So if someone is starting off and their VO2 max is perhaps in the average or below average category, but they're carrying a little bit of extra weight, if part of their plan is also to kind of lose some of that weight and to achieve a slightly more beneficial body composition, their VO2 max will kind of automatically improve, but both by the actual exercise that they're now hopefully doing, as well as the actual calculation being a divider by weight.
Yeah, so both of those sort of metrics moving in opposite directions to improve their score overall.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, Stuart, Owen, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and just bring Stuart in. So one of the variables that we haven't touched on there is also genetics as well. So, I mean, our understanding at Fitness Genes is that VO2 max is highly hereditable. And actually, I've been doing a bit of reading in preparation for this. And there was one paper in, it was 1991, that looked at a twin study that concluded up to 74% of VO2 max is determined by genetic makeup. So how can an understanding of an individual's genetics help us better assess and measure their VO2 max?
Sure. So I think heritability scores, I've seen from 50 to 75. The nature of heritability depends very much on the population, but I think we can take from all of those that there's a very large genetic component. So thinking about Owen was talking about ranges. First, athletes have probably self-selected for the people who have the genetic ability for the highest VO2 max scores are probably athletes, or at least have the potential to be athletes. But when it comes to the sort of the weekend warrior group, I think it can create quite a lot of interesting comparisons. So if you think about most people can improve their VO2 max, be it young and old, throughout life. However, there are going to be some people who have a lower maximum ceiling. So you can have someone maybe who's training reasonably frequently, has a VO2 max in their 50s, thinks they're very fit, looks to improve it a lot more. Actually, that may be the maximum they get. So first things first is there may be genetic reasons why people go and have a test and then can't move the dial. And it may be because they've reached their ceiling. And that's kind of the broad physiological readout of VO2 max. The second component, which I think is more interesting, is the difference in response. That's the response variability to the training. So there can be people that haven't reached their ceiling but struggle to respond to particular training protocols. Now, the variation in training protocols are seen, again, sex, there's difference in sex. I think you've got, as Owen was talking about, you've got this whole process. So you've got the central process of your lungs and heart, and then you've got your peripheral process where you've got mitochondrial biogenesis, and actually the mitochondrial then will use the oxygen within the muscles. You've kind of got those separate components. Actually, there's a difference in sexes where men respond more centrally as females seem to respond more peripherally, but sex is actually a small component of training response. Of course, there's the methods you use, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about in a minute, age as well, that impacts it. But actually, there's genetics, panels of genes that have been shown to identify responders and non-responders to the classical VO2 max training protocols. And the one we look at Fitness Genes is roughly 21, I think it's 21 genes, depending if you've used our array or 23andMe's array, we slightly tweak it. But you can put people into sort of super responders, which are great, then the average responders, but then 15 to 20% of the people are actually low responders to the classical VO2 max training protocols. And this mirrors what was seen in the 90s. I think it's Claude Bouchard from originally I think born in Quebec, but he was at a university in Louisiana, that show you actually have these people that do not respond to the classical VO2 max training protocols very well.
So, and I'm actually classified as a low responder myself, and I think we released this report at the end of a winter training block where I'd been running intervals around Battersea Park, and then found out through my own company that I was a low responder to that type of training, which was particularly disheartening. But yeah, could we just go back to that? So we've got these three groups of people, and in terms of their training or trainability, I think we term it as fitness genes. So we've got low, average, and high. And was it correct that you said 15 to 20% of people would be those low responders?
So within our cohort, we've got 15%, but if you look more broadly in the literature, there seems to be around 20% of people who are in the big training cohorts when research studies are performed on response to VO2 max. And of course, they go, this sort of trainer, they go, oh, look, training improves VO2 max, great. You've got this, zone 2 stuff and maybe some HIIT training mixed in, great. But actually, if you look at the individual, and it's very much about the prescription. And of course, you've got Attia talking very much about, oh, look, it is the master integrator, it's great at improving health, and on a population study size, epidemiologically, I agree, but actually on the individual level, it may not be the case. And I guess this is where, when you're doing an evaluation of an individual, actually knowing the fact that, okay, well, what's your genetic ceiling? Are you actually going to fit within this low responder group? And what is also your VO2 max to start with? These three parameters can actually enable you to really think about what the best next steps are. And of course, you can very much tweak how you calculate your thresholds. So instead of just using percentage of heart rates or percentage of VO2 max, you can look at the T1, T2 sort of lactate thresholds. But also you can think about, so I think in terms of performance, and just going back to the papers that Peter Attia uses and waves his flag of VO2 max is the greatest, actually they're looking at performance. You're looking at large populations of people that fail on a treadmill. So, and actually the health in essence is very much wrapped into that performance metrics, obviously which VO2 max is highly correlated. And I think that's the point, that in a general population, I think 60% of the variation of a performance, say in a 3K or a 2K, 60%, sorry, is VO2 max. So therefore there's another 40%. Obviously weight's a huge component in that as well. So you can start to think about, if you've got a client, you can think about, okay, well, am I going to look at running economy more while still going through my training programs? I'm actually going to look at, really think about weight loss. Is there a reason why this person isn't losing weight? That's something we could really think about. And there's other components like lactate training thresholds. Of course, we look at another trait at Fitness Genes. We look at lactate response, the fact there's a mutation in the transporter that actually cycles lactate in the system, which means you can better use it as a fuel, therefore lower your blood lactate levels. So there's other different components you can think about, other than just fixating on VO2 max. Now, I'm not saying VO2 max isn't important, it's very important, but it is a component of a more broader understanding of your physiology. And sorry, go on, Alex.
No.
Go on a monologue.
You're just answering all of my questions all at once,
sorry,
which is making my role rather redundant.
Yeah.
So I mean, my next one was how do we reflect on claims that VO2 max is the greatest predictor of lifespan? I feel like you just answered that there, but I want to go back to that point around the other sort of metrics that we're looking at. and what are the parameters we should be considering when assessing someone's overall health and longevity? I know you mentioned a few there, but do you think there's other critical elements that we need to be looking at rather than perhaps fixating on VO2 max as a single predictor because of some of the limitations that you've outlined?
Yeah, so I guess what Owen does with his DEXA scanning, and also actually, Owen, do you want a little chat about some of the other things you do? Because I think we spoke about. I think they're all very important.
Yeah. So I mean, other tests, obviously, kind of maintaining a healthy body composition, and is important for our kind of older clients. Kind of seeing what they can do to maintain muscle mass, especially as they get into older age, is really important. And for that, we both, we'll kind of pop them on a DEXA, maybe annually or similar, just to ensure that the kind of any muscle loss is being staved off. We also do a couple of strength tests, sort of isometric strength tests, like a grip strength and an isometric mid-thigh pull, so kind of like a static deadlift. And these are just kind of to assess that their ability to exert their muscles maximally is also maintaining, because there's no point, and I guess this is part of what Peter Attia is kind of talking about with health span. There's no point kind of living longer if a lot of that time is going to be immobile in a bed or being beset by kind of long-term disease. So it's about kind of quality of life as well, and for that we kind of really do focus in on kind of people building and then maintaining that muscle mass as they get into their older years.
Stu, anything you want to add? Or
yeah, and I think it's the and I always get very suspicious when someone says this is the metric to look at, and I appreciate he's got to sell books, and there's more in the book than that. But I think for people who are not seeing that shift, and again, there will people that will come and they'll be exercising, and they won't see a shift in that VO2 max number, and that could be concerning to them. Now, there is the component of we live in an age where we're talking about longevity and the fact that we all can pursue a life that's healthy to 90. It's just not necessarily true, which is an unfortunate thing to say. But more broadly, when unpacking with VO2 max, Peter Attia, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, Peter Attia. He talks about it being a master integrator. Now, as a scientist, that always fills me with worry, because what you're looking at is a broad endophenotype that's highly confounded. So if you think about when you do these big longitudinal epidemiological studies, you're analysing the fact that, okay, well, a certain individual, group of individuals had a lower VO2 max, and they then, in 5, 10, 20 years' time, presented with a disease in the clinic. Then there's a little sleight of hand that says, oh, actually, that means you need to improve your VO2 max. But actually what you may be seeing there is a presentation of the disease preclinically, which lowers the VO2 max. So actually what you're seeing is the disease in itself. So that actually will over bias. I'm not saying VO2 max is important. I am fully subscribe to the fact that cardiovascular health is incredibly important for long-term health. But what that does is it exaggerates the percentage change, and in some of his blogs he talks about it being 300% and over smoking and everything else. The problem is it's exaggerating the impact on VO2 max has, and therefore you have everyone piling down the gym doing VO2 max training, when actually the strength stuff may be just as important. Actually the diet may be just as important for some people, and it will be for people with hypercholesterolemia, for example, hemochromatosis, different genetic traits, who actually really need to focus on diet, or even social interaction with a lot of the dementia related. So it's, I think we just need to know VO2 max is important. I can absolutely see the value of doing a VO2 max test. However, this whole it's the principal metric, I'm not that convinced on, but it's important.
So just to take it back to sort of, or combine some of these themes that we've kind of discussed, and this is a question for both of you, and Stuart, I might get you to go first on this actually. So sort of understanding sort of these genetic variants that can influence VO2 max, how should genetics and VO2 max testing therefore be combined to offer a more personalised assessment and delivery of health and fitness recommendations.
Sure, yeah. So I think, well, you do the test, you know your baseline. It may be obvious that that was the result you're going to get or not. The genetic component then can go, okay, well, if actually I've been training for a long time, I've done a couple, and my threshold's not moving, then actually maybe it could be constrained genetically. I'm also not responding well to training. Well, the genetics can tell you that. But then there's these additional factors above and beyond that in terms of thinking about lactate threshold training. Do I have issues with lactate recycling? And then more broadly, and we've got these traits that already exist at fitness genes, is traits associated with weight loss, traits associated with exercise recovery. So when volume is a component of improving VO2 max, the traits that look at recovery, how you deal with recovery. So if you can't get your volume up, particularly with the zone 2 stuff, potentially there's some things that we can inform around that. So it's about building the holistic picture. I'd also say just probably doing an exercise you enjoy is really important. We forget these components actually in terms of, so we talk about, oh, you need to be on a bike. And I think it's interesting thing about bike versus running and how actually that can bias some of your results, because I've seen it like, was rowing, we were both at Oxford together, Owen, and did a lot of rowing and some races and stuff. And you get some very good rowers, and then you take them out of a boat and watch them run, and it's hilarious. And put those guys on a treadmill and their performance is going to be poor, and actually they're not enjoying it. So I think there's that component of just finding the right sport as well that I think I just need to underline. But sorry, Owen, you can probably add some better information to this.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, I could completely agree, and you know, I think, you know, it's always very interesting to, of course, see that combination of, you know, what your expectation is almost. We had someone come in, they've done the genetic test, they're an average responder for VO2 max. They did a VO2 max, they were already at 50. Oh, this is a young guy, 23-year-old. So we were like, okay, average responder, already at 50, probably peaking out there. We're not expecting a whole lot, but this particular person had only ever done weights training before. They changed up their training just because that's what they wanted to do. You know, they've decided that the latest thing that they were going to do was high rocks. They were going to compete in a high rocks. 12 months later, just prior to their competition, they had actually raised their VO2 max by about 11 points to over 60. So, you know, I would sort of say an average responder, you know, there is still a lot of scope there, and I think that there are possibly other genetic components that you know that will explain that as well. But you know, fundamentally, the person was doing a lot of what they liked. They put in a lot of volume. Their overall fuel utilization improved a huge amount, so they were using a lot more fat for far higher intensities. And in general, you know, they had a great time and they were absolutely thrilled with the results. So, you know, it is about that mix of stuff, and you know, even as an average responder, you know, the so-called average responder, there's still a lot of scope there. But the way that we would sort of say is like, even for a let's say we were to have a low responder, it's like, well, that's not to say don't do the exercise, because that's the really critical bit. It's not the score, I think, that is going to ultimately provide the health benefits. It's the practice of doing the type of exercise that can kind of improve to within the kind of the scope of what your body will do.
And I think that's an important point as well, because it's not that we're saying they're a negative responder, for example, and therefore shouldn't be doing this training, but it's just setting those expectations around what sort of improvement they're likely to see as a result of the recommendations you provide. So just going back to that sort of, in terms of someone who's looking to drive their VO2 max, if they find, you know, they're one of these enhanced responders, for example, and this they want to focus on, what kind of guidance do you give to clients between these tests that you provide them with?
It kind of depends. I mean, we rarely get people come in just going, I just want to improve my VO2 max, kind of at any cost. We get people coming in sort of saying, okay, I've got an ambition to run a marathon in a year, or I want to do a high rocks race or whatever. So the prescription will be very much based on what they want to do with it. anyone kind of running a marathon, it's going to be just as important, if not, to a certain extent more important, that they do that zone 2 training, that improvement of how they utilize fats in their body as a fuel throughout their run, because that will have a direct impact. The longer, the more fat they're able to use, and they will therefore be the longer that they are able to go without hitting the wall in a marathon, which is the really critical thing. Now, along the way, their VO2 max will undoubtedly improve, because there will be some more pacey runs, and there will be some more high intensity stuff. But that's going to be a very different prescription to the CrossFit competitor. What we see, as an example with CrossFit, their fuel utilization is terrible, because the competition is short. They carb up at the beginning. They're sucking on carbs throughout. So there's no reason, and the intensity is such that their body never gets to utilize fats. So for them, yes, the ultimate, the top figure, the headline figure of VO2 max is, can be really important, because that's the figure that they can kind of operate at, or just below. So it really depends. It depends on what the person wants to do with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like everything is very individualised and personalised depending on the goals, and also the readings that you're providing them with as well. Okay, great. So I'm aware of the time and the fact that we've got a couple of questions, and I think these may be for you, Owen, as a practitioner as well. Sure. KP from Horden was asking, can you recommend any particular brand of VO2 max testing equipment that gives good accuracy and goes well with the service you provide? Yeah,
sure. So, I guess first I would sort of say, just be wary of the ones that are kind of coming out. There's a few out in the market which are highly portable and very, very small. They're relatively new devices. The studies and the science on them is a little bit sketchy, and they don't show kind of really good agreement with some of the kind of the more established devices that are out there. We personally use a Core, which is an American company, KORR, but there's also Cosmed and Cortex, who are kind of big European manufacturers. All of these are kind of great devices, and will depend on kind of the use. I think the European ones tend to be more kind of with a research focus. We went with one that's a bit more customer friendly.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answers your question, KP. We've got a couple from. Can you spell those again, please? Was it KORR, Owen? Did you say?
KORR. Yep.
Cool. So KP, hopefully that answers your question. A few from Josh. Thoughts on the validity of the 10-minute treadmill test? So that is the shorter version, I guess. You were saying that usually it's about 20 minutes long.
I'm not sure if the 10-minute treadmill is that standard protocol. Stuart, maybe you know that. I don't know that protocol specifically, and whether it.
They use in the papers that I think Atty was quoting. They do a 10-minute treadmill test, and it's where they fail, and then they extrapolate using metabolic equivalents to then create. I think that may be what it is, right. To create to come up with the VO2 max parameters. And again, in large populations, when I think some of these studies had over 150,000 people associated with them, so it's a useful way of getting people to a score. Yeah. As I think we suggested, that a lot of it is it's more of a score for performance than real, true, objective VO2 max, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, I think those tests don't require the whole get up with a metabolic cart and all of that, and widely used. We do a lot of team sports with our mobile lab, and many team sports in professional sports don't use a full metabolic cart VO2 max. They go for things that the whole team can kind of do together. And those 10-minute treadmill tests or bleep tests even are still widely used.
Okay, that's interesting. So just a couple more, Owen, if that's okay. Josh says that's what he understood as well. We just check heart rate throughout for that 10-minute test, so correlating that data. The other two, KP got Core. What were the other two providers that you referenced?
I think it's Cortex, Cortex, and Cosmed, Cosmed. I think those are the two. At least one of those is German.
Okay, hopefully you managed to catch those two, KP. And then any special considerations for people with pre-COPD when doing VO2 max testing?
So I think someone with COPD or kind of thereabouts, that is more likely to become the limiting factor for that particular person rather than their VO2 max. So I would probably question how wise it is to even attempt a VO2 max, because you're not going to get a real figure. It's going to be extremely uncomfortable for them and could potentially, trigger something. So we would probably, depending on the individual and their exercise history, we would probably err against not doing that.
Okay, and then finally, specific frameworks or methodologies on VO2 max training, or other than Peter Attia's methodology. So anything else that you've sort of come across or you advise to clients who are looking to drive that?
I mean, they will all kind of cohere around certain things. To raise kind of your anaerobic threshold and to raise your total kind of output. You really do need to work, for a bit each week in those top ranges, whether that's through high intensity interval training or kind of more kind of pacey runs or whatever it happens to be, sprints. That is going to really help raise that top line figure more than anything else. And most training programs will cohere around having some of that thrown in there. As I said, depending on the reason for wanting a higher VO2 max, if it relates to longer endurance type runs or races, then I really can't emphasize enough the importance of doing the lower intensity stuff and putting the hours in for that, because that will just make everything a lot better as far as your fuel utilization is concerned.
Okay, so building that base, and then complementing that with like higher intensity interval work as well. I mean, for speaking from personal experience, so we do weekly tempo sessions with my running club, and the overall structure doesn't have to be particularly complicated. So last week we did 3 sets of 8 at sort of tempo pace, which is a calculation from your either 5k or 10k pace, and then this week we've got a 4, 8, 12, 8, 4 pyramid, and so it's just kind of structuring it based on sort of like time, distance, duration, and moving those variables, but still making sure that you're working kind of at that threshold or just above as well. So yeah, really good insight, Owen. And Marcio, thank you for recording those names. That's probably a job I should have undertaken. So thank you for dropping those in. Guys, that's been really interesting. So if there's any final questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Owen, you mentioned your mobile unit. Are you off anywhere exciting over the next few weeks? Anything that you can reveal to us? Any teams that you're testing?
We got back today, literally from the Bristol Bears. We're kind of getting more into kind of rugby as we go. We're kind of trying to expand that. Most of our teams are football because it's football teams who are got the most money to kind of spend on some serious testing, which is great. And we're all over the place, like every week, all over the place.
Yeah, that's the exciting part when I see that on your LinkedIn and that type of thing. So if people want to learn more about my Vital Metrics, where can they go? Where can they follow you? Where can they connect?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the info in its most detailed form is on our website, myvitalmetrics.com. But we also have social media, Instagram at myvitalmetrics and MV Metrics on the other platform, and of course on LinkedIn as well. But we're definitely we're all over the place.
And actually, as a final point, I mentioned at the top of the call that you provide DNA testing through the lab and Fitness Gene support you in that. So for people who are kind of considering this as their own service, how have you been able to use this in combination with other services that you provide and offer that fuller client experience?
Yeah, so I mean the aim is really to kind of give people the most rounded set of metrics that we can kind of then use to give very practical and real life advice and plans. So we will be coming out with some products in the coming weeks, which draw together a mix of the most appropriate in-lab tests that we've got, plus a relevant blood panel test, plus this genetic component. And I think with those three things combined, we can kind of get a very good sense of where someone's at the moment with regard to the in-lab tests and with regard to the bloods, and then kind of depending on what their goal is, we'll have several of these based on a healthy aging goal, a healthy heart goal, a kind of fat loss or recomposition goal, or a sports performance goal. So, our aim is with this product to really just attack it from all angles and give someone as much practical kind of advice to get the most out of their training from day one.
Great. And Stuart, I guess that's the strength of the service, the way that you guys have built it is VO2 max obviously sort of really significant, but that's one of, I think, about 178 reports that we currently provide and that we can have further conversations on as well.
Yeah, like the heart health example, we've got a lot on heart health, longevity components, weight loss, understanding the behaviours around eating, leptin, ghrelin, melanocortin system, all the pathways that everyone's trying to repress by injecting themselves with GLP-1 agonists, and so yeah, there's plenty of different facets to the traits, and and different providers will cherry pick what's relevant to their clinic.
Perfect. Great. So a couple of final comments. KP was asking, is that myvitalmetrics.com, Owen?
Yep, that's the one.
That's correct. You've got an invitation to go to Victoria, British Columbia, see if you can get the mobile unit out there. And Joe was asking, what was in the mobile unit? Is it just the VO2 max or is it body composition as well?
So it's actually, the mobile unit is focused around body composition. So it's a DEXA scanner that we've got in there. As I said, with the team sports, they do kind of prefer to do whole team activities to kind of measure their aerobic fitness, and depending on what the sport is, they're just as interested in agility and other things along the way. So we haven't put a VO2 max in there yet, but we're seeing what the interest is once we're kind of in the clubs doing their body compositions anyway.
Maybe one of those little portable ones.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got to hit that balance between...
It's a shame, isn't it? It wouldn't be useful.
We would.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, Owen and Stuart, as always. That concludes today's webinar. If you've got any more questions, either for Owen or Stu, you can reach Owen via the channels that he described. Fitness Genes, you can email into support@fitnessgenes.com. Myself and Stuart are also quite active on LinkedIn as well, so if you'd like to connect with us there, and Stuart frowning, not as active as
Alex is very active on LinkedIn. But I will respond eventually.
Yes, so feel free to connect and send questions my way. You can find me Alexander Auld Fitness Genes if you search that. So we'll also circulate a recording of this webinar with everyone who registered. So we look forward to inviting you to the next one as well. Thanks again, guys.